All right, we are live, I believe. Let me just double check to make sure that that is the case. If you don't know, I know just a little bit about orcs because it's kind of my thing. Fantasy is my thing, and I have a lot of orc characters. All right, we are definitely live. Okay. Let me put that on Twitter, and we'll get rolling into today's topics. I'm always hesitant to just go ahead and say it beforehand because, well, it has happened before where I started a live stream and then, well, I said I started a live stream and then it didn't work out, and then everyone was like, where are you at? Okay, we are live. Listen to your resident expert on orcs. Check in with me. Your residente. Hashtag orc. Hashtag orc. Hashtag orcs. As we discuss today's controversies. I should probably get the link to sharing this. That'd probably be useful. We want the Comicsgate hashtag. There we go. Okay, I just need to get the share link to this. Let's see. It's good that I'm almost glad that nobody's watching right now. Because we are still discussing it. Okay. There we go. I don't know. It doesn't have a bookmark image. I don't know if that's what you call it. All right. Let's see. There's not too much lag, so that's good. That's good. It's tweeting right now. It's getting my tweet out there. Okay. It's kind of a rare opportunity because I really do know a lot about orcs. And when I saw that they were trending, I was like, well, this is an opportunity because I know like way too much about orcs. My main orc character is on my hoodie. That's kind of that's how much I am, right? That's how much. It says we have one viewer. I don't know if that's me though. Still sending the tweet. I don't really know why that's taking so long. I have the definition. Okay, there we go. I have the definition of orc pulled up. Well, not really the definition, but more of its origins and where it comes from. Okay. Because this is kind of a complex thing because orcs don't really necessarily come from mythology. So the trick is really, they do come from mythology, but they don't. Predominantly, our modern understanding of orcs comes from J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. And yes, that is how you pronounce his name. I want to see if this works this way. Okay, good. All right, but I'm going to move me over here because the StreamYard logo is there. All right, so we want to look at the origin of orcs. I don't really know what has brought about the current conversation of orcs and like the controversy of it, but I feel that it's probably most likely has to do with just the fact that everybody's bored on their coronacation or the coronapocalypse. And so they're really just looking for reasons to be upset. And I do have some screenshots of some of the tweets that I saw on the trending things on Twitter, and I do have a general understanding of why people are upset, and that I can read why they're upset. Not that I understand it, but I can read it and comprehend what they're saying, even though I think it's dumb in some cases. So you might be actually surprised. I have a main character that's an orc, but I do not agree with what a lot of what I would call SJWs are saying about orcs, how they are supposedly supposed to be a racist depiction or stereotype of minorities, especially African Americans. And I saw someone that was instigating that it was like Mongolians or something like that. And here's the thing: they're not real. They look nothing like any of the races in our world. And Tolkien, the guy who essentially made orcs, I mean, he gets it from other different versions of the word, as we're going to see, because that's kind of how he operated. You can't really be racist towards a species that isn't real. A race that isn't real. Somebody's saying like all the races in D&D should be playable because, well, tieflings and all that. I'm like, but it's the same thing they're doing to comic book female villains. You have Harley Quinn, you have Poison Ivy, you have these comic book villains that are females, or at least they used to be. Now they're anti-heroes because we can't. It's like groups that are sensitive or they don't want to offend, we can't have them be a good villain because we don't want to say that all women are evil. Like, but you're not. Like, if you really want to have cool female characters, you should be able to have good female villains and good female heroes. The villains don't need to be the heroes. You know what I mean? Like, keep the villains villains and the heroes heroes. And if you're going to change it, don't let it be for SJW, like stupidity reasons. So getting into where orcs come from, orc is a mythical creature or of horrid form or aspect. The word orc in English has two distinct sources. Orc in reference to a vaguely, I can't pronounce that, sea monster is borrowed from one or more Romance words, such as the French orque or the Italian orca. I could be mispronouncing. I don't speak French or Italian. All ultimately descending from the Latin orca, which probably denoted the small sea monster, such as the killer whale. In the Ludovico epic Orlando Fabrizio, his epic poem, The Heroine Angelica, is set out as a victim of a man-eating orca in a literal recasting of the Andromeda myth. A different word for orc, alluding to the demon or ogre, appears in the Old English glosses in around 800 AD. It is composed of the words which mean monster in the poem Beowulf, and I'm going to bring that up here in a minute, the importance of Beowulf to this. As with the Italian orco or ogre, which if you really think about it, ogres are not all that dissimilar in appearance to orcs, and derives from the Latin orcus, a god of the underworld. The Old English creature were most likely an inspiration for the orcs that appear in J.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. So Tolkien, as always, if you don't know, Tolkien was a linguist before anything else. He was a professor at Oxford, and he translated Old English poems, epic poetry, into modern-day English so that we can read it, in addition to writing his epic stories that we now all know and love. And he actually is, I have his interpretation of Beowulf here, and he actually interpreted my favorite poem, medieval poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And a lot of people don't know that about him, but a lot of his characters, he did things very differently. He would do, as you see with the orcs here, he would find old words like we see here, right? And he would make something new from it. Like when he made one of his characters, he started with a name and then made the character. Whereas I always make the character, their appearance, and usually their weapon, and then I develop a name around the character. But he would do it the other way around. He would make a name in which the name had specific meanings from like Old English and other languages, and then he would make a character around it. So a little bit different there, and I think that's very revealing because that's exactly what he's done with orcs. He's taken an old word for monster and ogre and made it into an orc, which is something really of his own creation. An ogre is a hideous giant represented in fairy tales and folklore as feeding on human beings. The word gained popularity from its use in the 17th century story Tales of a Mother Goose. Since then, ogres have appeared, and lots of things, Shrek and all that. So yeah, Tolkien got the orc name from other mythology, right? So it's not based in any racial group that we know of. You might as well be saying that goblins are racist, or that giants are racist, or that the devil is racist. Like, it's not anybody like attacking a certain group of people. Again, orcs look nothing like any race, and humans, no human has green skin. No human has a great protruding jaw and humongous canine teeth and pig-like noses. We just don't. It's not there. It doesn't exist, right? So I actually have the way that Tolkien describes orcs here on my phone, and I'm going to read it to you because this is how it's described in his books, right? So Tolkien described orcs as squat, broad, flat-nosed, sallow-skinned, with wide mouths and slant eyes. In fact, degraded and repulsive versions of the least lovey Mongol types. So, I mean, there is some certain origin in that. It wasn't necessarily that he was going against Mongolians. But let me kind of explain some of the logic there. So in World War I, which Tolkien fought in, a nickname for the Germans was the Huns. If you know the Huns from medieval, that was a nickname for like Attila the Hun, things like that. So, I mean, there is connection there. And it says, are Tolkien orcs racist? He explicitly bases them off of the stereotype of the Mongol horde, but not actual Mongolians. Okay, that's a keyword. He told his son because his sons fought in World War II, fighting the Axis, that there are orcs on both sides of the war, including the Allies trying to build the atomic bombs. So it's very clear from Tolkien's own words that he said in a letter to his kids fighting in the war that he did not actually consider the orcs to be Mongolians, but more, or any kind of racial group. He gets it from these ancient words meaning ogre and monster. The fact that the orcs attack from the east in Lord of the Rings, I think, is widely irrelevant. I think it's just a geographical coincidence. He's European, and the Germans were east of England, and I think that that's not a coincidence, right? He fought in World War I, and he did serve in World War II in a non-combat role, and his sons fought in World War II. So it makes sense that he would think that evil would be coming from the east. And as you see here, I mean, he clearly states that, and under his own description, that an orc is more, that there are orcs on both sides of the front of the war, and that it has more to deal with an orc, in his reference to his letters with his sons, being somebody that is an agent of war. Because Tolkien had a great level of he despised the Industrial Revolution, the destruction of nature, which war certainly does. So I think that to lay it on Tolkien is a little bit ridiculous. But now that we have gone through that, another thing of note is that orcs are always depicted in European-style clothing, not Asian-style clothing. So that kind of further leads me to believe that if it were to take any kind of nationality, it would be German, and not really not any human race. And even then, I think the German thing is a bit of a stretch. So something that somebody said on Twitter was, People who are upset to learn that orcs are a racist caricature should perhaps consider that D&D's alignment system makes it impossible to avoid racism, and that alignment is a completely unnecessary mechanic. Apparently, we don't need to have lawful good, chaotic evil, and all that. This race of sentient people This race of sentient people are chaotic evil is a racist statement. Is it though? Because they're not real. And I mean, again, like, you have to have some kind of a villain. Like, to me, like, it's not a huge deal if you take, let's get a picture of an orc. If you take an orc, which is something that Tolkien made off of old, like, he made an orc off of ogre and monster in the Old English and other old languages. So it's not really like, in my books, the orcs are good guys, but I still have various monsters called the Virar who are purely evil. There's not an ounce of good in them. They are corrupted Firar. They are corrupted humans, elves, dwarves, and things like that. Like, my books have evil races. They have good races. Somebody else argued furthering on this that I thought was ridiculous. The way orcs are traditionally described, they draw on the same supremacist languages that have been used towards the minorities in the past. It baffles me that people ignore the one fact, in all caps, that ties orcs are written as savage, evil, and animalistic to orcs as written are problematic. All right, and then somebody else says, the current and past ideas of language surrounding orcs, tieflings, and a bunch of other sapient beings is problematic in D&D and RPGs. If your response to that is they're fantasy, my response is it shouldn't be a problem changing it for the safety and comfort of players. Well, here's the problem. Okay, so let's look at Batman. Batman doesn't kill, right? He doesn't kill humans. But if you have a Justice League episode where they're fighting robots or certain types of aliens that are not sentient, he kills them. He does. Okay, well, what if... Well, that's racist to have robots that are purely evil. That's racist to have certain alien species that are purely evil. Okay, well then what? You know, like, that's just lazy. Like, you have to have a bad guy. You have to have that object of villainy, right? So, like, a lot of my characters have this like, they have a problem with killing other Firar, other good races or good species, which they would say, these SJWs would say that I'm racist for simply having evil races. But here's the thing. I'm not saying that races in our real world are inherently evil. I'm making up fictional races, just like Tolkien did with orcs, so that my heroes have a villain to kill that's not sending the message to my readers, oh, go kill human beings, right? So, like, my heroes are able to kill these purely villainous creatures in incredibly brutal ways and not feel bad. Like, they're almost, like, it adds a level of interest to it. Like, you almost need that villain fodder. And if you make all of the villains good guys because out of fear of being racist of a fictional species, that's ridiculous. You won't have any villains. You know what I mean? It's like I said with Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. You don't really have many true blue female villains in DC Comics because they're so afraid that people will take it as, well, all women are villainous, or they're saying this about women by ... fill in the blank. Like, you have to be able to have a villain. They can't all be white guys. You know what I mean? That's racist. And by the way, making the assumption that black people look like orcs, that's racist because, one, they don't. Two, orcs are stereotypically depicted as being ugly. So are you saying that African American people are ugly? That's incredibly racist. So I would actually say that it is the SJWs that are being racist, and the rest of us, normal human beings, are doing just fine. So the original thing that I think sparked the debate was CW blatant racism. I'm in genuine awe that this SHIT came out. for this edition of D&D. Holy poop. And the thing he's upset says, role-playing an orc. Most orcs have been indoctrinated into a life of destruction and slaughter, but unlike creatures who, by their very nature, are evil, such as gnolls, it's possible that an orc, if raised outside its culture, could develop a limited capacity for empathy, love, and compassion. No matter how domesticated an orc might seem, its bloodlust flows just beneath the surface. Its instinctive love of battle and its desire to power its strength. An orc trying to live within the confines of civilization is faced with a difficult task. So that guy is very upset by that statement of orcs, which I would actually say that description of orcs actually still fits my orcs in my books. Although orcs are noble in my books, they still have an extreme bloodlust, and they were made specifically by the Odin / God figure to be warriors, to fight the evil in the world. So they do have a serious bloodlust, and they are more violent, cold-hearted, and they are quite ugly. But at the same time, they have a noble heart, and they're not going to hurt somebody that's good. So, I mean, it's not entirely dissimilar to the description that you see here. All right, so he says, somebody comments, orcs aren't human. They're literally a different species. They're going to have a different nature than humans. I'm not seeing why it's a problem unless you're projecting real-world issues onto it, which is exactly the problem, okay? You are attaching a racial group of humans to orcs. The fact that you made the connection of a certain racial group, African Americans, to orcs, tells me that you are the racist one, because black people look nothing like that. And the fact that you would naturally attach them to a fictional race that is known for being unattractive is kind of like really horrible. Like, what in the world? Why aren't they calling this guy out over this? Another guy says orcs are fictional, so the people who write them can do so without resorting to the kind of language that is frequently used to dehumanize black and brown people. Yeah, again, I don't really... orcs aren't a scapegoat for racism. It's not like if I didn't have orcs that all the bad guys would be my African American characters. That's not true at all. That's absolutely and utterly ridiculous. It's straight up asinine is what it is. The simple fact is orcs were made by J.R.R. Tolkien. As he made all of his characters, he combined several old words that are no longer in existence to create something new. That's how he made the names of Elrond. That's how he made the names of Aragorn, Pippin, Merry. Well, maybe not Merry, but his names were made from historical sources because he was a very knowledgeable man. It has nothing to do with a racial group. And again, in his own letters to his sons, it is, he referred to certain people as orcs, but he said there were orcs on both sides. So if you're going to make the argument that Tolkien is racist because all of the evil comes from the East, Germany is to the east of England, and there are a lot of threats that have come from the East, like Russia. He's not necessarily talking about any group of people. And I might also add that Africa is not to the east of Europe. It is to the south. So I don't understand the connection, and I think it's actually quite racist to make that connection on your own. Now, in my books, I use all of my orcs have Israeli names, but it has absolutely no connection to the ethnic group of the Jews, other than to say that the orcs are like the chosen warriors by Odin or God, and they get persecuted a lot like the Israelites have done. That is the only connection. They are not based off them in any other way. It's not some symbolic, secret, offensive, racist thing. I love orcs. I think orcs are really awesome and a cool character. I've taken Tolkien's idea of an orc and, I've changed it to my vision, and I don't think that's bad because he kind of did the same thing with ogres. I mean, orcs are essentially his version of ogres, if you really think about it. And by the way, the orcs in the Lord of the Rings movie look pretty different than the orcs that Tolkien drew himself. So like their appearance can change dramatically. There's so much of a variety of them, which is kind of going to lead into what else I'm going to talk about here. Moving away from Tolkien, because I feel like I've pretty well established that Tolkien really has nothing to do with race. I think he just needed a villainous group that orcs more than anything else in Tolkien's book represent the Industrial Revolution. If you look at the book, you look at Saruman, you look at Sauron, it's all industrial. They destroy the trees and the nature around them. The allegory, the message, one of the messages behind the Lord of the Rings is that the Industrial Revolution was destroying the agricultural layout of Europe. He would actually drive around in his car with his family, and comment about how he was upset that tree that he grew up seeing was now gone. Like he was very, very passionate about the destruction of the nature and the trees of England. So again, orcs, the villains of Lord of the Rings, really have nothing to do with race. I don't think that there's a really good argument behind that. And if to summarize, if you think it's because they come from the East, well, he's fought in World War I and served in World War II. His kids fought in World War II. If he's talking about anything from the East, it'd probably be Germany. And he said that there were orcs on both sides of the war, meaning allies and Central Powers. So again, orcs are not a racial thing. It's more of a group, a species that he made that embodied the Industrial Revolution and the destruction of the natural world. It's not a racial thing. Okay, they symbolize the Industrial Revolution, and that goes for Saruman as well. If you've read the Lord of the Rings books, you know that it's not like the movies at the end. When they come back to the Shire, Saruman has basically industrialized it, and they have to fight to take it back. So I don't think that it's really a coincidence. I think that if anything, the guy that made orcs, it was about the Industrial Revolution, and that's what I'm going to say about that. Just another emphasis that he got a lot of his stuff from older things such as the works of William Morris, Beowulf, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight were huge influences on him. I actually wrote my senior thesis. It was like a 40-page essay on exactly that. So I know a little bit about what I'm talking about. All right, so orcs and other depictions. We have orcs in the Lord of the Rings movies, which are purely evil. There's no question there. It's purely evil. There's no good in them. They're purely savage. They're purely aimed at destroying good, which again, in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, it's symbolic of the Industrial Revolution. I wish I would have made that connection in my head earlier in the video. I feel like I rambled for the first half hour or so with pretty unorganized thoughts. But this was kind of a surprise thing for me. So I kind of decided, I'm going to take advantage of this. The next big group that I want to look at is the Elder Scrolls orcs. And this is largely where I got the inspiration for the appearance of my orcs, right? So they have green skin. Traditionally, in Tolkien's descriptions, they have green skin, right? And I think that the Skyrim orcs look much more human than a lot of the other iterations that we see. Although the females are always really ugly. All right, so you could definitely see inspiration on Narbad. Let me pull him up. Well, actually, I can just come over here. This is my campaign. This is my main character who is an orc. You can tell he's very human looking. You might even describe him as a half orc, but he's a full orc in my books. And not to say orcs actually come in a variety of skin colors. His orcs in my world are a pale olive. It's hard to see unless your screen coloration depends on whether or not you see the green in his skin. But he has green skin. He has the orc teeth. He has a normal, it's a little bit uglier nose than a human nose, but they do look very human. They look a lot, I think he looks a lot like a Skyrim orc personally. It was kind of the part of the goal. I don't think there's a huge difference between this and that. Their noses look pretty much the same. Their teeth look pretty much the same. I've actually gotten a little bit of flack from that. You know, that to say that if you don't like orcs getting a bad rap and them not being playable as good characters, I have that. But it seems to me that the big issue revolves around that they don't like races and fantasy genres that are purely evil. In which case, I move orcs over to the good side, kind of like you see in Skyrim and Elder Scrolls, and I just make a different version of an orc. I mean, they're not orcs, but they fill that role of the evil, right? So like on this illustration here, which is the cover, you'll see these things here. These are lifts, okay? I made those up. They are essentially, another name for them is actually surface goblin, which goblins straight up come from mythology. Tolkien didn't make those. So lifts, we have wendigos, which are from Native American mythology. And we have Ormiller, which I made up on my own. I took the body of a troll and put the head of a moray eel on it. Because you have to have those purely evil races. You have to have the big villain. You have to have his minions. It's kind of boring in a high fantasy or a dark fantasy if there are only humans. Bravo to George R. R. Martin for largely keeping it human, but even he has White Walkers and whites. All right, so like you have to have in a fantasy. I can't imagine you having an interesting fantasy that doesn't have your purely evil race. And see, that's the thing. That's the thing with comic books. Okay, they're so worried about females or certain groups of people being offended that the comic books are now boring because they're not willing to take any risks, right? They're not willing to be what they used to be. We definitely don't want to see a change like we've seen in comic books happening in fantasy, and I simply won't stand for it. I will always have my purely evil races. You know what I mean? You just have to. It would be boring if you didn't have them. You need fodder, pure evil. Okay, you need to have the fodder because you can get some seriously epic, like Assassin's Creed level kills from it. And number two, fear. If there's not the element of fear that the enemy outnumbers the good guys and that the enemy is pure evil and they just look freaking creepy, then you have a boring book. I'm sorry, but you do. Even a human villain usually has some kind of a physical, unattractive quality to them. Like you just have to have it. So you have Skyrim orcs who are largely increasingly good guys. And I don't have a problem with that because they still have races that are purely evil. Again, I don't think this is purely an orc question. I think this is a question on having races in fantasy that are purely evil. And I think that, you know, it's okay if you move orcs over to the good side, as I have done. But you still need those villains that are purely evil and like the race is just straight black and white evil. There are no lifts in my books that are good. Now, that being said, you can actually do a mix of that in a way that's really interesting. And for that, I want to bring out R.A. Salvatore's The Hunter's Blade trilogy and The Orc King. All right. These are actually some of my favorite fantasy books. I'm, again, a huge fan of orcs. I absolutely love orcs. So in these books, the orcs are essentially trying to conquer a dwarven kingdom in these three books. And that's like a huge assault. You can kind of see how the orcs are portrayed there. They look almost like monkeys. Let me pull that actually up on the screen. Let's see. The Hunter's Blade trilogy. I was looking at the spine art because I liked it. I like the graphic design on it. So you can see what the orcs look like here. And by the way, this is Forgotten Realms, so this is D&D. Forgotten Realms is D&D. In fact, No, these have Wizards of the Coast on. Some of them actually have D&D on the spine as a logo. So you can see here the look of the orcs, but I actually prefer... this will work. Oh, I forgot I'm on freaking Google Chrome. You can't, like, on Firefox, you can just, like, right-click it and view image. And it's just much easier. Dang it. There's probably a way to do that on Chrome, but I have no idea how. But you can see, like, the orcs have very almost like piggish faces. They're not attractive. And in these books, it kind of raises these questions of exactly how it was described in the D&D description, okay? That they are naturally evil and violent, but they can be good. They can learn to be good if they're brought up right? So that's kind of what the D&D thinks. It said, most orcs have been indoctrinated into a life of destruction and slaughter, but unlike creatures who by their very nature are evil, such as gnolls, it's possible that an orc, if raised outside its culture, could develop a limited capacity for empathy, love, and compassion. So that's kind of the question that's going on in these 3 books. And it's really well done. It's very, very well done, actually, because the main character, Drizzt, is asking the question of, if orcs have good in them, is it okay for me to kill them as I do without prejudice, right? And see, when you do it like that, well, see, that makes it interesting, okay? It's not SJW. It's not, they're using it as an element to make the plot more compelling. And by the way, spoiler alert, they end up figuring out that no, orcs are, yes, they are bad. You shouldn't feel bad killing them because they are evil, okay? So that's kind of the conclusion that he comes to in this. And then he asks that question again with the Orc King. And he kind of reevaluates the question, and the conclusion is pretty much somewhere in the middle. Like, orcs are still inherently bad, but in this case, they have such a big army that we kind of have to settle and put a treaty on the table and let them build this kingdom in the mountains, right? And so I really like that, because that was really my first exposure that orcs were not just purely mindless brutes. Like, I don't know if you ever watched the Viking show, but the character Ragnar Lothbrok kind of reminds me of the Orc King character in here. Like, he's savage, he's a Viking, or he's an orc, but he's intelligent, and he sees the benefit. Okay, he sees how the orcs have been slaughtered for thousands of years, and he's like, well, I'm tired of my people being slaughtered, so maybe we could learn to be more civilized if I, the king, lead them there and work out a treaty with the local dwarven kingdom. And of course, the dwarves in these books have huge prejudice against orcs. So it's a very good book. But the point is, this orc king, who is kind of villain, kind of not. And I think that's a really compelling story. And I think that that's where D&D is right now. And the fact that people have a problem with that, the fact that they're not okay with orcs being bad or good, like, they're bad and they're inherently, like, they have a predisposition towards being bad, which is what you see in this book, but they can be good. I don't see anything wrong with that. It's not racist. Orcs have never been, as we've already discussed, attached to any racial group. And for somebody to come in and say that they're a depiction of African Americans is actually incredibly racist itself and highly offensive. Like, if I was an African American, I would be like, what the heck is wrong with you? Like, orcs have nothing to do with black people. The next is this book, Orcs by Nicholas Stan. I would actually not recommend this book. This is actually a collection of 3 books. It is terrible. And the villain, this contains the most inappropriate, like sexually inappropriate, like beyond what you can possibly think of, material of any fantasy book I've ever read. And it's just horribly written. Like, one of the characters at the end, for no reason, gets himself killed. And it was like, just for the sake of killing off a character. And it was really stupid. But the plot may be stupid, but the characters are awesome. The characters in this are really compelling. They're all orcs, and it's kind of this same dilemma that they are savage, they are brutal, they are excellent warriors, and they are ugly. But that doesn't mean that they're mindless and or brutes. And I would actually say that this is a very unique version of what an orc would look like too. There's no teeth. The nose is kind of normal. There's no orc teeth, I should say. But so this book's very impactful on me, and its sequel as well. It's very impactful on me in that it was further showing me, because for a while I just wanted my orcs to be good guys. That book showed me that your orcs can be almost like anti-heroes. Like, my orcs in my books are freaking brutal. I mean, one of them's name is Zach Bonebreaker, and he will literally rip out somebody's spine and beat them to death with the spine. Like, I mean, he is the most brutal character ever, but he fights for good. All right, so in my books, orcs were made to defend the original 5 races that were made by the Odin god figure. And then orcs were made later as a race specifically designed to defend the other good races from evil. So orcs are generally have a lot of prejudice against them in my books because people kind of consider them not an original part of the Farrar. They're not considered a part of the Farrar, which are the 5 original races: humans, elves, dwarves, giants, and Sakare. And gnomes are also in there. They were kind of like the personal gardeners in heaven or Valhalla, and they get released into the mortal world as well. So you have those 2 races, orcs and gnomes, which are misunderstood and not really considered to be a part of the other group. So orcs are often misunderstood, okay? They're very brutal, and they have a freaking intense temper. And kind of like in Skyrim, like, you know, the special ability in Skyrim is like for once a day, you can take half the damage and deal double. Orcs in my book have the power of the orc, which is essentially a surge of adrenaline, which gives them supernatural abilities. They were, you know, as it says in the books, they are God's greatest warriors. They were made to fight. That being said, a lot of the other races are maybe jealous of them, and yet also not jealous because they're naturally ugly. So I don't know. It creates a very unique dynamic where the orcs are very complex because they're at heart, they're very noble, and they're very, very, very loyal to their creator. And you could say they're kind of like God's chosen people. And again, you're kind of seeing some of my biblical inspiration there, but I don't know. Just make like this character in particular, Zach Bonebreaker, like he's got a chip on his shoulder because he feels like his people were kind of dealt a bad hand because, you know, the orcs have saved the Farrar countless times in the past, but now they're enslaved because of misconceptions, jealousy, and their reputation for being brutal. They do consider orcs to be savages because they've seen how they behave in battle. But the orcs were made like that on purpose for the Farrar's benefit. So like, it's like, we were made to protect you. We did that. And because we did that, you now think we're savages and you enslave us. So he has that chip on his shoulder. A lot of orcs also have the chip on their shoulder that they feel, you know, being made purely just to die on the battlefield is kind of a shallow purpose in life. And so a lot of them kind of resent that as well, as kind of like their lives being meaningless and that they don't really have a lot of value because they feel like they were made to be killed. And so it creates a very interesting dynamic with my characters that I really, really love playing with. It makes a really interesting characters. So in summary, I think that, you know, to insinuate that orcs are somehow a manifestation of racism, I think is very racist in of itself and ignorant. Orcs, the term orc was made by J.R. Tolkien as he made all of his names from other names that already exist. and he made something new from it, which is exactly what I did. I made orcs good, and then I made a new villain to kind of replace them, because you need to have those black and white villains. And orcs have come in many different shapes and sizes. In some iterations they're good, in some iterations they're bad. But again, I don't think that this argument is exclusive to orcs. I think that people have a problem, from what I've seen on the Twitter, people have a problem with certain races in fantasy being purely evil. And again, I don't see that as racist. They're not real. First of all, they're not symbolic. I've already debunked that they're not symbolic of any of the races that we have on our Earth and our reality. If anything, in their origin, they are symbolic of the Industrial Revolution and the destruction of the natural world, which is not exclusive to any race except for maybe white people. Like, we're the ones that did the Industrial Revolution. We're the ones that committed imperialism in Africa. Like, if anything, it's white people that it's symbolic of. But even then, I don't think it is. So it's not derivative. It doesn't come from any racial group. I just think people are stupid. I think that at the very core, I think that people are just bored. I think that the coronavirus has them bored and they're just looking for something to be mad about. In my opinion, do with orcs whatever you want. They're a mythical creature. If you want to have a story or even a D&D campaign where you're an orc, that's fine. My D&D character is an orc, and he is brutal as all get out. His name is Yoren Burnside because he's got these massive sideburns. And the guy is brutal, right? That's fine. It's ultimately up to your dungeon master, your DM. If you want to have an orc character that's not evil, that's fine. Do what you want with it. Who cares? It's a mythical creature. There's no racism in its origin. There's no reason to be upset. Go have your coffee, calm down. Back my book. We are one backer away from being 60% funded. One backer away. And in other news, I did get an update from my Russian illustrator. He does expect that his hand will be healed by, I think he said, like 2 days from now, and that he would get right on his work for the Comicsgate piece right away. So, and I am also working on a visual companion to go with the campaign. It might be an add-on item. It might be just that every backer gets one. It just depends on the cost of it. But I'm really hoping that convinces people to back the book. Because I understand, like Comicsgate, you guys like comic books, and mine is a novel. I get that. I'm trying really hard. To get your support, like really hard. And I feel like my success has been pretty minimal so far, but it's, there's been some success. I really hope to gain you guys' support. The book is done. I mean, I'm continually editing it because I want to make it the best it can possibly be. But I already have the rough draft of the graphic design on the cover. I have all of the art done that's actually going to be in the book, and on the book I have the map scanned. I'm in the final stages. Again, I keep editing it to keep making it better, but soon I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to read it through one more time, and then that's the last time I'm going to read it through, and then I'm going to get it formatted. The whole book will be ready 125 bajillion% ready to print before this campaign ends in 29 days. So please consider backing it. I hope that we actually had some people watching. I don't know if I can really tell on here. Oh, we have 0. Yet again. Well, for those of you that watched for even just a little bit, thank you, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. I hope you found this interesting. I really do know a lot about orcs. So peace out. Have a good day. Please consider backing my project. Peace out.